Um, I want to welcome everyone to our, our fourth Training for Teaching Zoom meeting this year. Once again, I just want to mention Toonie Page and Still Point Farm, who has been a very generous sponsor of the whole program when it started last year. And our Zoom meetings have been sponsored by the Sprizer Sport Horse Elite Club. All of this is on your emails that have come out. Very happy to say, from your all's incredible donations, this was one of these great ideas that I had. You know, if people want to donate a little, and then D4K will match it, and we'll have a little scholarship to give out. Well, you all unfortunately have so far given us over $5,800, which unfortunately D4K is going to have to match. And then Teresa Davidson donated $2,500. So we are up now to just over $14,000 for scholarships. And what we're going to do, the application will be put up soon. We haven't decided, we are not deciding that we will give maybe $3,000, $5,000 scholarships or $15,000, $1,000 scholarships or whatever. We're asking that you, in the application, tell us what you would like to do that will be educational for you as a riding instructor, and give us a budget, and then we will, a group that we have a little committee that will decide how the scholarships will be given out. So you'll get an email telling you about that. The links, Mary has put up the links to the our YouTube channel, the links to the past meetings that we've had. That's up in the chat section. She's also sent it to you by the emails. Everyone is muted except our speaker. And she's asked that you make any questions, comments in the chat section. Those of you on computers, the chat section is, you can find it on the bottom of the page, and those of you on phones, I'm afraid I don't know where it is. Our next meeting's with Beth Baumert on March 14th, boosting learning power for you and your students. And then our last meeting is, I didn't put the date down, at the end of March with Laura King. So obviously we will send all of that out. So I think that's all that I have to say. And so I will turn you over to Jen. Welcome.
All right, thanks. Thanks for having me, Lyndon. Fun to hear your voice and fun to be here. And I was saying a few minutes ago when we were chatting before we started that I've been experiencing over the last year or so more and more trainers, more and more instructors really interested in learning tools for helping their riders overcome not only fear, but also other emotional blocks and helping them with high performance skills. So this is very timely and I think a really important dimension of our ability to teach, and to teach all kinds of different riders, from, you know, adult amateurs who have maybe developed some fear issues from bad experiences, or just have kind of, as they're getting older, lost their confidence a little bit, to high performance riders who are really shifting from sort of having things be easy and doing well to suddenly wanting to really up level their riding to a whole new place. You know, more and more, I think, and I think Laura King, you would probably agree, more and more high performance riders are really realizing that mental skills and emotional, what I call emotional suppleness, is really a huge, huge part of being able to achieve your goals and achieve the kind of success and partnership you want to have with your horse. So really fun topic actually tonight, even though it's about fear and self-doubt, it's a really fun topic. My name is Jen Verharen. I have a business called Cadence Coaching. I've been doing this now for about 10 years. I was an eventing instructor, dressage trainer for 25 years before I sort of reached a burnout point and decided I needed to make a shift in the way I was riding, the way I was training, the way I was doing things. And I, at the time, hired a coach. And I had such a positive experience. At that time, it was a business coach, but such a life-changing experience for me that I started to utilize the tools that I was learning with my students at the time, and had incredible results, introducing things like values assessments and goal setting, and some of the things we're going to talk about tonight with my students. So I became a certified coach, and through my experience as a corporate coach, I got hired as a corporate coach right off the bat. And I was coaching people all over the country from my little dusty tack room on Vashon Island in Northwest Washington. And I got experience not only as a leadership coach and a health coach, but also as a business coach. And so really, I didn't get so interested in this performance coaching and this helping writers overcome fear until a few years later, when I had some experiences myself, and I really had to look at what it took for writers to overcome fear in order for me to continue as a professional and continue my own writing career. I had a couple of experiences. One, I was with perfectionism. I realized at a certain point that competing was no longer making me better. It was making me more tense, shorter with my horses. It was not giving me joy. It was not, making me feel like I was learning and gaining things. It actually made me feel frustrated and like I was in a box. So I took time off from competing, and made some real shifts in my life, the way I was thinking, how I was writing and teaching. And those are some of the shifts now that I share with my clients. The second thing that happened to me, and this also was about 10 years ago, I got bucked off royally in the middle of a Konrad Schumacher symposium. And I was not injured real badly, but I got enough fear with this particular horse. It was a really young, athletic, big mare. And I had a lot of hopes and dreams around her, had a lot of investment in her. And to make a long story short, for the first time in my life, because I've been riding since I was very young, I experienced real fear in the saddle, and it became debilitating in my riding of that particular horse. So I went on a journey at that point. I read books, I worked with sports psychologists, I did everything, I knew how to do, because I was so motivated to get past that fear for myself. So what I now do with riders is sort of a combination of both my formal education in psychology, but also now an accumulation and integration over time of my own work and the work that I do with riders as a trainer, and now the work that I do with riders as a performance coach. So that's why I'm here now. And one of the things that I have framed over and over is that, as riding instructors, we love to teach. We love the horses, we love the riders, and we want to do the things. And sometimes it's hard when things come naturally to us, or we've been riding since we were very young, to fully understand fear. And we are because horses are inherently dangerous, and the longer you ride, the more experiences you're going to have that will make you aware of your mortality. And this is something that we as riders and trainers, I feel, have a responsibility to learn to work with. And so I want to talk first about what is fear, because fear, we tend to think of fear as sort of terror, and that it's a very acute emotion. And what I'd like to leave you with tonight really is an understanding of fear as a whole spectrum of different emotions. Fear simply is an emotion that is generated by the idea that something bad might happen or is happening. And it shows up in so many different ways. It shows up as anxiety, as nerves, as self-doubt, avoiding things. We all have those students who come and want to chit chat for 20 minutes, and it's because they want to avoid cantering at the end of the lesson. That's an example of fear that shows up in a way that you might not recognize it. Procrastination and perfectionism are all forms of fear. And post-traumatic stress is one that is easily recognizable. And we're going to talk about that tonight, because that's one that I've learned. There are some really important ways to work with people who've had post-traumatic stress experiences that's quite different from what we might instinctively want to do. So we're going to talk about that. And most importantly, fear is part of a really important alarm system. And one of the biggest challenges for us as riders is that we are putting ourselves on 1,200-pound animals that are inherently unpredictable. And so what we do every day, there is an element of fear. So we have that kind of fear. And we also have a different kind of fear, which is not always necessarily real. It's based on more thoughts we have or things that we anticipate may happen. And one of the things that has become more and more apparent to me over the years now working with people is that we have two voices in our heads. And one of them is that a voice of the part of us that is really hardwired for growth and change and evolution, that part of us that wants to succeed and become a really good rider. And we want that excellence and that mastery. And we want to go out and get it. And then there's another part of us that is hardwired for survival and to stay safe. And that part of us tends to resist change. That is the voice of what I call our inner critic. We'll talk about more. But that voice is the one that kind of holds us back and often tells us we're not ready, we're not good enough, makes excuses. That's the part of us that talks ourselves into procrastinating, or what we might call self-sabotage. And so we all have these two voices in our heads. We all have these two sort of driving forces inside ourselves. And we need to be able to help our students sort out what is fear that's legitimate, that we should honor and pay attention to, and what is fear that's really the result of this sort of survival inner critic voice in us that's just trying to keep us from progressing and moving forward. And that inner critic voice really is benevolent. It's the same voice that when we were little, kept us from running across the street and getting hit by a car or touching a hot stove. So that's not a voice we want to completely disregard. But what we want to help our students be able to do is have a different conversation with themselves inside their heads between those two voices. So I want to talk to you guys just briefly about several different kinds of fear that show up often in our students and in our riders. And while I'm sort of describing these different types of fear, if you could write in the chat box or take some notes yourself, if you have students you recognize in any of these descriptions, or you want to ask a question about any one of these, or I was hoping we could do a couple of case studies at the end, if you have anybody who falls into this category that you'd like to have some tools for. So go ahead and write those in the chat box or write them down yourself. Okay, so anxiety is a low-grade chronic fear that's the result of repetitive worry, and it's usually generalized. And what I mean by that is people who have anxiety, generalized anxiety about riding, they usually have anxiety in other areas of their life as well. It usually shows up in a lot of different places. And one of the beliefs that I have about anxiety is that it's about a lack of self-trust. And when you are anxious about what is going to happen, what might happen, what could happen, what has happened in the past. And it's a fear of not being able to handle it, of not being able to handle that emotion that's going to happen when that bad thing happens. So that shows up in a lot of different ways in riders. So go ahead and write down how you see anxiety showing up in your students. Post-traumatic stress is fear that is related to a specific past trauma or reimagining a particular event. Or in some cases, it can be related, like if someone has a friend that has a really bad accident, or they witness something and they just see something traumatic, those things can result in post-traumatic stress, where they reimagine it, they re-experience the emotion of that original experience whenever they're triggered by particular events that happen. So that's a more obvious form of fear. One that we come up with, I know, all the time as trainers is nerves. And nerves basically are the result of a habitual way of reacting to stress, and that interferes with performance. So that makes your performance worse when you go to a show than when you're at home. And we're going to talk for sure about strategies for helping students with that. Avoidance, we talked about a little bit earlier. And this is sometimes unconscious behavior. Your students may not be aware that they are avoiding certain things or that they're chatting with you for 20 minutes to get out of cantering. And sometimes it's more of a big picture avoidance. They might be actually doing things in their writing that's sabotaging their own success in the long term. And you might recognize that as their trainer. And we're going to talk about some ways you can help mirror that for your students so they can recognize what they're doing. Procrastination and making excuses. So I always like to encourage people to think about whether the excuse they have, is it an excuse or a reason? Is it real, or is it something that their inner critic voice or their survival voice is trying to use to talk them out of doing something risky or scary? And usually procrastination and making excuses, it represents not a fear. I don't like to talk about a fear of success, but a fear of change. And it's a really obvious form of self-sabotage. Most people know that they're doing it. One that's really big for us as dressage riders is perfectionism. And perfectionism shows up as a generalized tension related to wanting to do a good job. And of course, perfectionism is a double-edged sword because it can actually inspire us toward excellence, or it can interfere with our ability to achieve excellence. So thinking things are supposed to be perfect and constantly comparing reality with perfection will leave a person often feeling tense and frustrated when things are not perfect. Self-doubt shows up as self-deprecating, comparing yourself to others, worrying about not being good enough. And self-doubt consistently kind of shows up for people when they, social media is a big inspiration for a lot of self-doubt, going to shows, going to clinics, people comparing themselves to their friends. And self-doubt can hide, it's really, I work with now some top writers in the country. And I really think it's important that we all recognize that we all deal with self-doubt. And that even the writers that are out there, and they look like $1 million and they look so confident and they're achieving their dreams and doing all these amazing things, they're not doing it because they don't have self-doubt. They're doing it because they've learned how to access the courage to go beyond it, to act despite their self-doubt. So this is, I think, an important part of working with riders that have self-doubt and our students who have self-doubt is normalizing it and making sure that they realize that they're not alone. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So all these are normal. And I think that's the biggest, most important thing. What we're talking about tonight is emotions and fear that interfere with a rider's ability to progress. So we're not talking tonight about, riders who just experience a minimal degree of stress or anxiety and they already work through it pretty well. And it's, something that you find easy to work through. We're actually talking about riders that stump you a little bit. Where you're like, I really don't know how to help this person because I can see that their emotions, their self-doubt, their fear, their procrastination is getting in their way, but I haven't figured out how to help them. So what I really, my objective for tonight is to share with you some concepts and some ideas and some tools that are maybe new, that you can't read out of a book. And there are going to be a couple things that are a little counterculture to our equestrian industry, our horse industry. And so I'll explain that when we get to the things that may seem a little counterintuitive to you. And I want to mention that the reason I'm doing this PowerPoint presentation is not because I love PowerPoint presentations, but one of the things I've learned over the years is that when you hear something, you see something, and you experience it, there's a higher level of retention. And I also use the PowerPoint so that I don't have to constantly be looking at my notes and figuring out if I've said anything. It helps me be able to stay more engaged and make sure I cover everything. So if anybody wants a copy of this PowerPoint presentation when I'm done, I'm more than happy to give it to you. But it's not designed to be entertaining, just so you're aware. Okay, so why do we as trainers need to understand how emotions work? Why don't we just, refer our students to therapists and counselors and sports psychologists when we come up against a mental block we can't help them with? I believe that the reason is that as trainers, it's important that we have the ability to help our students understand how to process their emotions and get to the other side, not just try to stuff them and get through them, but to really help them understand how to process them so that they can make sustainable change. And if we have an understanding of how emotions work, we can offer our students real science-based strategies, but in a way that is really practical that they can understand. You know, there are a lot of people that are very scientific based and science-based, and like you can't understand, you know, the layman can't understand what they're saying. And then there are a lot of people that are very energetic and can help you know, tell you to breathe and tell you to relax and tell you to, you know, say affirmations and things like that, but they can't explain why those things are important and why they work. So what I have come to understand is that it's really important for riders to both understand why you're asking them to do what they're doing, and then be able to practice it. So as trainers, my objective for you guys tonight is that you take away maybe 1 or 2 ideas that you can go out and actually start using with your students. And obviously this makes us more effective teachers. And I think the #1 reason for understanding how emotions work is so that we don't inadvertently make things worse. And we're going to talk about how that happens in a minute. Okay, so how emotions work. So if you think about dogs, babies, and horses and how they process emotion, they can easily go from, you know, a dog can be happy 1 second and scared the next, and then love on you 1 minute and, you know, be afraid the next. Babies cry and then they giggle, and their just emotions are just moving through them. And a horse can spook, and then it could be on a long rein and a free walk in the next, you know, few seconds. This is how emotions are supposed to work. Emotions are real. They are neurochemical things that happen in our body. They are not just in our head. They are not something that we make up. They are actual experiences and they are happening physiologically in our bodies. And what happens is that humans, we have an experience over our lifetimes, especially in our Western cultures, that inhibit us from effectively processing emotion. We're told, you know, early on, don't let people see you cry. Don't let the horse know you're afraid. Don't get angry in public, you know, control your emotions. So we are trained early on that we should be able to stuff and control our emotions. And this is why, you know, almost 100% of the time, if you start to feel emotional in front of someone, you'll try to hold back your tears. If you get angry, you'll try to hold it in. And so what happens is that as we do this over time, we keep emotions from doing what they are supposed to do. If we have an emotion and we are aware of it, we recognize it, we sort of embrace it, it will move and it will go on. And so if we experience something dangerous and we feel afraid, and then the danger goes away, we shouldn't feel afraid anymore. The fear should move through us and go away. But what happens is, as humans, we have thoughts that keep that fear in place, that kind of keeps it, I think of it as like a pot of boiling water. So emotion is meant to move like a wave through the body, like it does through animals and through babies. But when it stops working well in humans, that's when we start having problems, is when danger subsides, but fear doesn't. And what happens is that we can, you know, not feel it. We might, you know, be distracted, or we're thinking about other things. But as soon as we come into contact with whatever that original trauma was, or whatever the original experience was that triggered a particular emotion, we are going to kind of feel an over the top exaggerated version of that, of the emotion that we should have. Let's see, I didn't say that very well. So it's like if you're stuffing emotions, it's like you build a scab up, and you can go through life not feeling afraid. But then if something happens that reminds you even a little bit of something that was scary in the past, it's like ripping that scab off, and you're going to have an emotion that seems out of proportion to the experience you just had. So one example, I'm working with someone, this is a real simple example. She was trying out horses in Europe. She got really, really badly bucked off in an arena. And she now, 6 years later, still, every time she enters an arena on a horse, she experiences a real adrenaline rush, a real fear, real emotion. And she's perfectly fine walking down the driveway, walking in the woods, going on the trails, but it is in the arena that still triggers that for her. So that's an example of how emotion gets stuck and then gets triggered in certain situations. And this is I'm going to make this distinction in a few minutes, because this is I believe this is, as trainers, the type of fear we really need to learn about and be able to work with. So what I call the fear cycle is what is a habitual response to stress. And I hope you guys will all recognize this. So the way fear generally works is that we have a thought as a rider, and that triggers an emotion. And that emotion, usually we'll call it fear or anxiety or nerves. And that emotion actually triggers hormones and chemicals to be released in the body. And it's usually stress hormones, usually cortisol and other stress hormones. And those generate a lot of physiological symptoms. So you might experience, you're holding your breath, muscle tension, time speeds up, it's hard to concentrate, sweaty palms. Sometimes people hear rushing water, get tinnitus. It's hard to focus. You'll have those momentary blackouts during your dressage test where you suddenly can't remember where you're going, even though you know that test inside and out. All of those are the physiological symptoms of those hormones that are being released. Then, as we all know, as you have that physiological response in your body, that gets transmitted to the horse's body. And then the horse experiences particular emotions and has also the same hormones released in their bodies. And then the horse starts to make associations with certain riders or certain situations. And then we as riders start to make associations when we feel those responses from our horses, and it creates this vicious cycle. And I think most riders are familiar with this cycle. So I call this the fear cycle. And it's what I think is the important part of this to share with riders is that this is the normal danger response. This is supposed to happen. Those hormones, once they're released, once there's cortisol pumping through your veins and your body is in fight or flight, you're in it. It's very challenging for riders that are really in a high state of activation. The nervous system is in a high state of activation. It's hard for them to follow instructions. It's hard for them to think. Often, they might feel tingling or numbness in certain parts of their body. So if we're trying to teach them and they're in this high activation state, it creates a real challenge. So this is one of the things, and it's something that we cannot necessarily in that moment talk the rider through. We can't use logic in that moment when our rider is in essence in fight or flight. So different emotions trigger different chemical and hormonal response in the body. So what I just described to you guys is the habitual way that we tend to respond to stress. So that's how most of us, if we go to a show or, we're nervous going out on a trail ride, or we're nervous about hauling our horse for the first time, whatever it is, we're going to have that fear cycle happen. So what is important for us as humans, not just as riders, but as humans to understand, is that we can intentionally change that cycle. We can change that response. And the most common, the most powerful way to intercept the fear cycle is through the mind. There are times when that doesn't work, and we're going to talk about those, but we're going to talk about first how to intercept it through the mind. It's important, I think, for instructors to have tools, what I call mindset mastery tools, to help intercept this cycle through the mind. It's important for us to have what I call emotional suppleness tools, so we can intercept this process at the emotional level. And it's important for us to understand the physiology of the emotion so that we can also help our riders intercept at a physiological level. So we're going to talk about all three of those just briefly. And I could talk for like 10 hours on this, so this is going to be a very condensed version. So the goal of us as instructors is to help our riders shift from that habitual fear cycle into what I call a power cycle, to shift from fear to power. And when we do that, we have a similar, I'm actually going to go back up to this. So if we have a thought, so an example of fear cycle is having a thought of, oh my God, what if my horse spooks? That creates the negative, or the not negative emotion, but the nerves and the anxiety, and that gets the fear cycle going. So if that rider instead has a thought that triggers a different emotion, whatever emotion they want to be in, it might be, they might want to feel calm. They might want to feel inspired. They might want to feel happy or joyful, whatever it is. We are always responsible as human beings for the environment in our own minds. We have the ability to train our brains to have thoughts that generate a constructive emotion. I like to call it energetic calm. When we're competing or riding, we need to be calm, but also energetic. And so this is a thought then that, and I can experience it myself just talking about it. I sit up straight, I take deep breaths. I feel different when I'm even talking about the power cycle versus the fear cycle. And these emotions, if we have an emotion like, energetic calm, that is going to trigger endorphins and positive mood enhancing chemicals and hormones to be released in our bodies. And those tend to make us feel very responsive and present and athletically available, and have a sense of mastery and really being present in the moment, not thinking about the past, not thinking about the future, but being able to be really in the moment. So this is a really powerful idea for riders, that they have the power to shift into the zone and to get to shift to power and to create this state for themselves, irregardless of what their horse is doing, or whether they're at a show, or whether they're at a clinic, or whether people are watching. So this is a lot of the work I do, is really helping riders understand their own ability to change the environment in their own mind so that they can have the experiences they want, and then really create the kinds of partnerships that they want with their horses. So the results of shifting to power, from fear into power, are huge. Or there are a lot of results. One of them is that you have an increased ability to focus, to listen, and take instruction. So if you can just pause for some, I call it a pause for purpose during your lesson briefly, and give your riders some tools, or have a conversation that gives them some insight, you could actually improve in five minutes their ability to take instruction and to listen. You can give them a sense of mastery. You can help them feel more confident. You can help them have a stronger ability to form new patterns in their brain so they can do it in other areas of their life as well. One of the things for dressage that I find hugely powerful is the ability to slow time down and be very methodical in your riding. That's one of the things that happens, of course, in the fear cycle, is everything speeds up and we are no longer able to be as intentional. We are also, when we're in the zone, as opposed to in the fear cycle, we're able to feel and respond instead of react. So we have a better awareness of the horse, and we're able to influence the horse more. The definition of the zone that I love is that it's a dimension of human experience shared universally. Its characteristics include deep concentration, highly efficient performance, emotional buoyancy, a heightened sense of mastery, a lack of self-consciousness, and self-transcendence. So this is what we want to be able to help our riders do. Okay, so you have the ability to help them do this. Our brains, there's something we think, like 70,000 thoughts a day, and 90% of those thoughts are the same exact thoughts we had the day before. And that's really important. It's a really important piece of information to have, because our thoughts create this superhighway. They're very habitual, and it's difficult to shift our thoughts out of their own superhighway and create a new one. So it takes practice, it takes having a plan, and it takes being intentional to help a rider shift out of their old thought patterns into new ones. So our job as trainers is to help them build a new superhighway in their brains. And like I said earlier, we can intercept fear in 3 places: the mind, the emotions, and the body. We're going to talk first about mindset mastery tools. And these are appropriate when there's a clear connection between what the rider's thinking and the physiological fear response. And I find in the people that I work with, this is about 80% of people. This is really the most powerful place to intercept. And the fear cycle is clearly triggered by automatic negative thoughts. And the objective is to retrain your brain so that you have a new experience and that you can switch from one emotional state into another. There's so many of these that I would love to share them all with you. I'm going to share one that I use most often and one that I think is most often misunderstood. And that is having a mantra. A mantra is a word or a phrase that is repeated frequently to help in concentration or meditation. So that's the definition of it. But as riders, we use it, I use it slightly differently with riders. It can be a word, a phrase, or a line from a song. And it's really important that the mantra inspire an emotional response or an emotional shift. It's not an affirmation and it is not a directive. I'm a good rider is an affirmation. And I personally am just not a fan of affirmations. I mean, you could look and say in the mirror, I'm a good rider a million times and, maybe it would help, maybe it wouldn't. But affirmations generally don't inspire an emotional shift. Also, you don't want your riders' mantras to be directives because that is what we do to ourselves all the time as riders. To great benefit sometimes, but sometimes it gets in our way if we're constantly keep our heels down, relax my shoulders, watch my right, I gotta keep my right shoulder down. Oh, there's a corner coming. I gotta use my inside leg. Like we get all this chatter in our head and we get tighter and tighter and tighter and more into the fear cycle. So a mantra is not directive. Some examples of mantra are like, let's dance. Like you say that to your horse. Power and presence, let it be. Or for a jumping horse, one fence at a time. Those might be mantras that generate an emotional response. I'm going to share a couple of examples with you because I think these are really helpful. One of the things that I've learned, and most riders agree with this, is that fear tends to separate us from our horses. As soon as we feel fear, we leave. Like our horses' experience is that we are sort of gone and we're checked out. And so sometimes mantras and you say, you don't have to say these mantras out loud. These are mantras you can say in your head. If you say them to your horse, that creates an extra level of connection and helps really, it's a very grounding thing to say it, to have a mantra that you share with your horse. I have a client who just was competing at Global the last couple of weeks, and she was going out for the first time at Grand Prix, and she has a really cool, sort of older horse, FEI horse. This was also his first time at the Grand Prix, but he's kind of an older experienced horse. And she's been struggling with nerves hugely to the point where she was maybe not even going to go to these shows. And she decided in our first session, right before the first of these last two shows, that her mantra was going to be, "We've got this, old man. We've got this." And so she said that, this makes me get emotional, but she said that to him going around the outside of the ring. And she actually said it out loud. I don't encourage people to, especially in dressage, to say their mantras out loud. But she said she did it away from the judge, so the judge couldn't hear. But she said she had this amazing experience because as she said this to him, like, "We've got this, old man," she said he relaxed, his ears started to flop, and she went in her first time Grand Prix, and I think she got like a 64 or 65. And she said it completely changed her experience because instead of her mind thinking about what the judge was thinking, what other people were thinking about all the places where she might make a mistake, she instead said, "We've got this, old man." And one of the things about mantras is they allow us to shift away from giving ourselves all these directives and to trust our training, trust our ability to sit up there and utilize all those years of experience that most of us have had. And so that is a great example of a mantra that helped her gain a deeper connection with her horse in the moment that they were getting ready to go into the ring. And she found herself saying that to him at several different points during the test. So a mantra can be really powerful if you help your riders discover what it is. It should actually make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up when you hit on the right mantra. Another mantra, I had a client who had a really hot PRE horse that she did both working equitation with, and she was trying to get her silver medal on him. And he was just so hot, and she called him her popcorn horse, and they would get tense, and she couldn't do the tempi changes, and she couldn't do some of the working equitation things. And her mantra was like a duck, and just like water off the duck's back. And every time she said it to herself in her mind, she could just feel the popcorn like chilling out. And was a doctor, and she's like, she was very skeptical about this whole mantra thing. And when she went out and tried it for the first time, she said people were literally coming up to her and asking her what she had done and if she had taken the tranquilizer, because and then she was able to go on and get her silver medal and able to progress to the advanced level in working equitation. And she actually has a bracelet now with like a duck written on the inside of the bracelet. So these mantras can be really powerful for people, and it takes sometimes a while for them to come up with them. So that's one thing that that's a simple mindset mastery tool that you can use with your students to help them change the environment in their own mind. The goal is to fill their mind with thoughts, constructive thoughts. So there's no room for automatic negative thoughts, no room for ants, and to shift them from one emotional state to another. Okay, the next thing I want to share with you is how to help your riders cultivate what I call your inner coach voice. We talked earlier about this idea that we are hardwired both for evolution and growth and for survival. The inner critic voice, that's the voice that wants to keep you safe and hold you back and keep you, in a nice little ball at home on the couch like a burrito. And your inner coach voice is the voice of your dreams, your ambition, your self-regard, your confidence. And the inner critic voice is never going to go away, and it never should go away, because again, it does keep you safe in certain situations. It can keep you from taking certain risks that maybe you shouldn't take. But most of the time it's holding us back from taking risks where all the good stuff is on the other side, right? So we want to help our riders learn to cultivate the inner coach voice and to recognize and quiet the inner critic voice. And sometimes this takes the form of teaching them how to have different conversations inside their head. The inner critic voice is usually not based on facts. It's very repetitive. It's very black and white. It's always thinking about, all the bad things that can happen. And one of the most powerful things you can do is to talk to your student and help them sort of experience that voice as not themselves, because we tend to believe that voice. We believe that inner critic voice. We think that we really think those things about ourselves, that we're not good, that we're too old or too fat or too young, or, whatever it is that we tend to think about ourselves, we believe those things. And if we can stop and identify that voice as not a part of us and what we really believe, but a mechanism for protection and safety that's inside of us, and we can identify the things they say, we can start to separate from those things, and we can start to think critically about those negative thoughts that we have about ourselves, and we talk about all the time. Like I say to people all the time, like, would you say that to your best friend? Would you watch your best friend in the warm up and say, gosh, your horse is not as nice as everyone else's, and you don't look near as good as everyone else, and the judge is going to think your half pass is crappy? And like, would you really do that to your best friend? And so this is one of the, your inner coach voice is how do you cultivate a voice in your head where you treat yourself like a friend that is a supportive, inspiring voice. And if you ask your student what their inner critic voice is, what it says, they'll say, and ask yourself what your own inner critic voice says. You're not good enough. You're not ready. Everyone else has more and more this and that. You might fail. You might make a fool of yourself. Everyone thinks you're this or that. They might not like you if you do this or that. All these things that our inner critic often says that are quite real in the moment. So if you can help your students understand that inner critic is not them. These thoughts are not the truth. They're designed to keep you safe, to keep you from taking risks, and keep you from progressing, and we all have them. invite your student to, and we could just use like a real micro example. If they're riding and they're, doing a shoulder in and they're thinking about all the things that are wrong and trying to correct everything that's wrong and getting frustrated. How do you redirect those thoughts to what is it they want to create? Having a vision in their mind of what they want to feel, what the bend should feel like, what angle they want, what do they want their aides to be doing in the moment, like thinking positively toward what it is they want to create rather than all the things and thinking about all the things that are going wrong. They will have a much better shoulder in by the end of that session if you can help them reorganize their thoughts around what they want to create rather than what's going wrong. If you can help them, especially in a fear situation, if they're afraid, if you can help them identify what their goal is, what matters to them. One of the things I use with people a lot is, who do you need to be for your horse right now? For your horse, who does your horse need you to be right now? And that will help them rise to the occasion, rise above their inner critic thoughts, and take that high road toward that confident, organized person that their horse needs them to be. So you can help them find language for the things that they want to intentionally focus on by asking them the questions. Get curious about what are the things they want to create. What do they want to feel in that shoulder in? What would they like to have happen? But granted, this is students that know what a shoulder in is, because you've already gone through that, explaining what the shoulder in is. But that is a part of helping them experience how to train their brain. So this inner coach, it knows your own strength. It has a growth mindset. It's willing to kind of push you to do things that are risky. It's based on evidence. Like, I had a client recently who was really afraid to buy her next horse because she'd had a really bad experience with the last horse, and had a trainer who wasn't honest with her. And this new horse was perfect, and she was petrified to buy it. And she said, well, what if my new trainer is trying to do what the old trainer was? What if she's trying to take advantage of me? And I said, has this new trainer giving you any reason to believe? Are there any facts that would give you, a reason to believe that this new trainer is going to do that? And she, of course, said, no, this new trainer has been amazing. So she was unable, because of her fear, unable to really separate the two trainers in her mind. So I was able to kind of help her really look at what the facts were in the situation before, what the facts are now, so that she could choose to act based on facts rather than based on fear. So that's just a little example of how you can support your students in sorting out what's real and what's not. And usually the inner coach voice is the truth. So your inner coach voice is you. So this is one of the things, you're not just trying to hype yourself up or be a cheerleader. You do need to do some investigation to find out what kinds of things that inner coach voice needs to say. Some other mindset mastery tools that we're not going to go over tonight, but I am going to be doing in March a month-long online program for trainers, and we're going to be talking about what a power persona is, how to do belief conversions. Imagery is really powerful. I read through, Landon, your list of analogies, loved that. I've actually been using some of those. How to set a powerful goal. When you have a really powerful goal, it can help riders have the courage to get through a lot of the challenging parts of gaining mindset mastery and emotional suppleness. Knowing your big why, understanding why you ride, and getting to, as human beings and as riders, we tend to our behaviors tend to be in response, and our thoughts tend to be in response to our current emotions and to pleasing other people, instead of us having thoughts and behaviors that are in alignment with our goals and our values and our ambitions. And so helping riders really get clear and articulate what it is they want in their riding, why it's important, will help them jump over the people pleasing and jump over the emotions of the moment to really honor those things and act according to what they really want. I have riders do transition rituals that help them shift from, their busy, crazy, stressful work lives to riding at the barn and being present. And identifying core values is a really powerful mindset mastery tool. And there's a gazillion other ones. But these are all ways of helping riders create new pathways in their mind, new neural pathways. Our brains are very plastic, they're very elastic, and we can help our riders change their way of thinking if we help them understand why it's going to be valuable for them. Okay, all these tools, they have to be personal to each rider. I can't stress enough how important it is to be curious and ask questions and help the rider identify what images, what language, what voice, or what goals are meaningful to them. And then as the trainer, you can repeat, reinforce, and support them with their own words, language, and images. Okay, now we're going to shift gears briefly. How are we doing on time? Okay. I know I talk fast, I'm sorry. Emotional suppleness. This is super important, okay? This is the one that we don't often understand well enough as trainers. Emotional suppleness tools are appropriate when your nervous system kicks in before there's time to intercept it with thoughts. Thoughts still are always trigger our emotions, but there are times when our nervous system is on such high alert that, like the example for me with my big gray mare that I became afraid on, she would just flick her ear and I would be like at a 5 out of 5 on the emotional fear scale that we're going to talk about. And so there was no time for me to think anything. I couldn't use a mantra. I couldn't, there was no way for me to mentally rehearse that. My alarm system was just on overdrive. And usually this is in response to a post-traumatic stress, or if someone's feeling their emotions like at their throat, if they're in grief or they're very angry in their lives, fear is going to be right at their throats, and that'll contribute to them being more spooky in the saddle. So the objective in this case is to help teach the rider to become the observer rather than the owner and judger of their emotions. And this is so important. And it's hard to even talk about this actually, because until you experience it, it's hard to believe. But I've done this now with thousands and thousands of people. When we shift from judging our emotion and identifying ourselves as a nervous rider or a fearful rider, and instead are able to just say, okay, I'm feeling afraid, and this is where it is in my body, and start to ask some questions about it, like, where is it? How big is it? What is the sensation in my body? It starts to move 100% of the time. I have never had this not work. And as we teach our riders to respect and accept that they are in a particular emotion, that they are experiencing fear, we can help them move through it very quickly. This is counterculture to a lot of our Western culture, period, and onto our horse industry culture, because it's like, okay, just jump it again, just jump it again. We have this idea that the more we acclimate, or the more we expose ourselves over and over to whatever the stimulus is that's causing the fear, that it's going to get better. And the experience of my clients over and over and over is that is not the case. If they are in this high activation state where their emotions or their fear is triggered really quickly, it acts like a lid on a pot of boiling water if you try to push through it and acclimate yourself to it over and over. So as trainers, when we say, just do it, there's nothing to be afraid of, just relax, he's fine, he's not going to do anything. All of those things, when a rider is really highly activated and in fear, they make the fear worse. They make it become even more fixed in that rider's body, even though our intentions are really good. Because that rider starts to think, why am I feeling this? They get more and more frustrated with themselves for feeling the fear. And that's another lid on the pot of boiling water. So observing emotion allows it to move. It's that simple. And of course, the first thing I always question people about, especially if I'm with them on a horse and I'm on the phone, is we need to determine that they're as safe as they can possibly be on a and that they're being fair to their own nervous system. Because what we're really doing here is training the nervous system like we would train a young horse. And the simple exercise for this is to pause for purpose. So that means you pause whatever you're doing, stop. And that might mean that they could keep the status quo. So if they're walking, they can keep walking. If they're whatever, they need to be in a place where they're comfortable. Ask them to name the emotion. They might say it's anxiety, it's fear, it's, you know, whatever they're feeling in the moment, nerves. Ask them where they are on a scale of 0 to 5. And 0 being flatlined, I feel great, no butterflies, no nothing. 1 is a little few butterflies. 5 is I want to get the hell out of Dodge. I can't think, my legs are numb, kind of fear. So you want to ask them where they are. Most riders will be, 3 or 4 when they're like really nervous on the horse. And remind them to take a few deep breaths. And then you want to ask them where in their bodies they feel it. That's the most important thing, because as long as we think fear is in our heads, there's nothing we can do about it. It's in our bodies. So once they are able to say, okay, well, it's in my neck, or it's in my chest, or it's in my gut. And I know this sounds crazy, but I ask people, how big is it? Is it hot or cold? What color is it? And the most important one is, how much does it weigh? Because give me a number. And they'll say, oh, I don't know. I said, give me a number. How much does it weigh? And then you have them breathe a couple more breaths, and then you ask them again, okay, where is it? How big is it? And it will start to move. It'll start to get lighter. It'll start to change color. It will start to move. For some people, it might take a little bit longer, but it happens 100% of the time, and it's so crazy. And the goal of this exercise is to help them teach their nervous system to process the emotion so it begins to move like a wave when they feel that fear. So if you have a rider that like bursts into tears for seemingly no reason, or who, goes into rhesus monkey position, as soon as the wind blows, or who gets petrified of going by the scary door, or whatever it is, those are examples of the kind of fear that this exercise can be really powerful with. Okay, and then to go even beyond that, if you're going to train your nervous system, retrain your nervous system to process fear. I always say, like, you look at somebody like Charlotte Dujardin, who just looks like, she's the confident, she could conquer the world. She's probably never felt nerves or self-doubt. And we know that's not true. We know she's just damn good at processing that emotion. When it happens, it moves through her like a wave, and she can be on to the next thing. That's what we all want. We don't want to be fear-free. We want to be able to process that fear and get on to the next thing. So to increase our body's ability to distinguish between real and habitual fear responses, we need to really be able to identify, we need to be able to, even though we're having a big fear response to something that's not very scary, we need to deal with the fear anyway. Even if it's not something that seems scary to us as a trainer, we still need to teach our rider how to move through that. And what that looks like sometimes is starting at the mounting block. I always ask riders, okay, so when does it start? When do you start to feel like you're going up to a 2 or a 3? Sometimes it's when they're driving to the barn. Sometimes it's not until their instructor says, get ready to canter. Sometimes it's when they get on the mounting block. Wherever it starts, that's where you want to start this fear cycle process of, okay, I'm standing on the mounting block. Feel the adrenaline. I'm up to a 3. I'm going to breathe through it. Okay, it's in my chest, and yeah, it weighs about 10 pounds. And okay, I'm back down to a 1. Like, it'll literally start to happen like that. And so you can help them, and then they go to get on, and they're going to go back up to a 3 or a 4, and you help them. You give them the time to, okay, I'm back up to a 3. I'm really nervous again, and let them experience processing it again while they're sitting in the saddle at the halt, and then they walk on. And this might seem really tedious and like it would take a long time, but what it does is it trains that nervous system to begin to operate really efficiently and really correctly, so that that rider, and this is the body part now, you guys, this is the physiological part, that rider trains their nervous system to have a larger capacity to handle things. So not only can they handle standing on the mounting block and mounting, but they can begin to handle when their horse spooks and they go up to a 3 or a 4 on the fear scale. Okay, they've trained their nervous system so they can come right back down and go right on with their lesson. So if, it really pays to do what I call pause for purpose. which is to pause your lessons sometimes and address these things, experiment with some of these tools, because you will make more progress in the long run. If it's just like training horses, we and this lumping versus splitting in positive reinforcement training, we have these two terms. Lumping means when you pile a lot of expectations on all at once and you ask too much and the horse sort of shuts down or responds with tension or stops being able to learn. If we split things up into smaller expectations and smaller steps, the whole process actually gets a lot faster because they begin to learn more efficiently. So break your objectives up into small pieces. If you have a student that's in a high activation state, ask yourself, okay, how could I take this down to a really small piece and help this rider work through this one piece at a time? And then continue to use that fear scale at each interval. So this is creating awareness in the rider and also awareness for you. And, as you experiment with this, you'll see the horses respond the same way. The horse will get a little activated when the rider's mounting. And then as the rider goes down to a 1 or a 2, you'll see the horse go down to a 1 or a 2 as well. And really spend as much time as you need repeating each of these little pieces before moving on to the next. And again, this is with riders who are in an emotional state that is interfering with your ability to teach them and with their ability to ride well and learn. So our comfort zones need to be blown up slowly like a balloon in order to grow larger rather than quickly. And this, again, is when people are in a high activation state. A note about breathing. So of course, when we're talking about physiology and about body and about fear, we all, talk about breathing. And it's so important, I think, for riders to understand that this isn't just something we say. This isn't just something that we try to do to relax. We actually have nerve receptors in the very bottom of our lungs that are responsible for activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of the nervous system that is responsible for rest and digest, rather than fight or flight. So this is why it's important to teach riders to incorporate breathing into their riding. And there are a lot of different breathing techniques, breathing exercises that you can use. And I would encourage you to research some of those. I teach a lot of different breathing exercises and techniques to different riders for different situations. But I think that's something really important for us as trainers to understand, that breathing is a big part of retraining that nervous system. Okay. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry, Lyndon. I'm almost done. So things to avoid when you're teaching someone who is in fear. Trying to convince them that there's nothing to be afraid of. That, again, is like putting a lid on a pot of boiling water. Pushing them to push through fear and to just do it if they are really afraid or feeling really emotional. Telling them to relax, and we all do that because we want to help them relax. But again, it's a directive thing. And it really, for them in that moment, they don't have the power to relax if you're not giving them the tools they need to relax. If you act baffled or frustrated by their fear, which is really easy to do when you feel like you can't help them like you'd like to, or getting overly invested yourself in their success or the lack of their success, trying to use logic to overcome emotion is something that we often do. And, yelling, which I know nobody on this call would do, but yelling or putting them down or increasing pressure, you'd be amazed at the things that I hear that trainers and instructors do when they get frustrated working with riders who have fear. So you want to really take a step back and help, kind of process yourself what's happening and develop a plan for helping them rather than letting yourself react in the moment. Okay, so the things we can do in addition to what we've talked about are acknowledge that they're normal and not alone. The whole spectrum of fear is normal, from low-grade anxiety and self-doubt all the way to, terror. Stay curious, ask a lot of questions, get them laughing, talking, singing, and moving, because movement helps us process emotions more efficiently. Be willing, nice spelling, be willing to take the time to work through the emotional piece. So again, pause with purpose during your lessons. Treat your student as whole and complete and capable. Even when they feel afraid, they feel small, they feel like they can't do anything, they're very low confidence in that moment, you treat them as whole and complete and capable until they believe that themselves. And again, breaking things down into small pieces, and then being able to help your students identify resources. You know, if you really think they need to see a therapist or a psychologist or a sports psychologist, or if there's lots of great books out there, you know, help them read books, give them resources that can help them in ways that you may not be able to help them in a 45-minute lesson. All right, and so I wanted to, before I ask for Lennon, if we can do some questions and ask for some takeaways, I am going to do the performance project again, backed by popular demand in the spring, and that's it's a 6-month online course that I do for riders that helps, you know, we talk about all of these different kinds of things. And then I'm also now working on teaching tools for trainers that'll probably come out in March, and that'll be kind of a short 1-month online program talking about all this stuff and really opening up the conversation among trainers about these things, because one of my mission statement, part of my mission statement is really about creating collaboration among trainers, because the more that you guys share information, the more we have these conversations, the more we have to share with our students and give with them and become better instructors. So that's always part of the intention of my online programs, is to open up that conversation among trainers. So now, Lyndon, you can slap me on the wrist because I used up all the time. And do we have time for some questions, or shall we leave it at that?
Well, we can continue. We say we're going to be an hour, and certainly if anybody wants to leave, we won't hold it against you. But there are a couple of situations that you might be able to give a little advice to. One is, I have multiple teenage girls that come to the barn on the verge of a breakdown due to fighting with their moms. I listen and try to let the barn be a mostly positive and supportive distraction, but wish I could do more. One talks to a counselor of sorts, the other does not. Any advice for Laura?
Yeah, the teenagers are a real challenge because they are often dealing with perfectionism on a really high level. Teenagers are notoriously acting on their emotions and are not acting based on what their goals and their aspirations and their core values are. They get very much into pleasing certain people and not pleasing the others. And it's so hard to have a dynamic at the barn that is, you don't let that the toxic relationship between teenagers and parents get involved. So without knowing more about the questions, you know, I think as trainers, one of the important things to do with teenagers is to have conversations with them that help them get clear about what their intention is, what are the results they want. And as well as having really clear boundaries about what's acceptable and not acceptable at your barn. You know, if they're having those conflict-driven conversations with their parents at your barn, that's your responsibility to be able to, you know, set boundaries and help them understand what's, you know, okay and not okay at the barn. But beyond that, to get them to think about what their goals and their values are, and whether the way they're treating their mom, the way they're acting, maybe you know, quite often they'll have temper tantrums with the horses as well, or talk back to their trainers, and kind of hold up a mirror for them. Okay, this is what you want. You want to be this kind of a rider. You know, these are your riding goals. Is the way you're acting now, are these things you've just said, is this behavior you've just shown me, is that in alignment with that rider who's accomplished your goals? I think that's one of the hugest things you can do as a trainer is understand a rider's ambitions and their goals, so that you can constantly help them decide whether their behavior and their thoughts are in alignment with what they really want. And teenagers are very, very responsive and susceptible to this idea, because when they're acting out like that, it's often because they feel out of control. And if they can start to understand the power they do have to act in ways that are in alignment with, you know, what they want rather than those emotions. And then of course, giving them tools for, you know, pausing. And again, this is pause with purpose, to stop and breathe when they're feeling angry or misunderstood or frustrated, and help them, you know, understand the similarities between dealing with their parents and dealing with a horse, that their parents deserve the same respect that a horse does. And how do they deal and process with frustration and anger when they're riding? How could they do that, with their parents as well? And I know it's really challenging to deal with families. We could go on and on about the conversations to have with parents in that situation. But I don't know if that fully answered your question, but that's through my lens, the feedback I would give.
We have two very similar questions. I'll read them both that came early on, and then you covered it somewhat. But I'll read them both and then see if you have anything much to add. I see anxiety from kids with perfectionism tendencies who are chronically pushed from both directions and often comes across as tension and lack of relaxation. And the other one is, how do you address students that are perfectionists but have not learned how to channel that positively? As I say, those came very early in your lecture. Do you have anything to?
Yeah, I think for that second one about perfectionism, the big why is really important. And the big why is, why do I ride? Why do I spend all this time and money? Why is this so important to me? And, even those teenagers that seem like all they care about is the blue ribbon and, winning, or, being very goal oriented, being externally goal oriented. If you really ask them, it's about different things than that. It's about the partnership. It's about the fact that their horse was the only person there for them when they were 6 years old. It's about the fact that they want to make their parents proud, or, you can find out what it is. What is their big why? And help them, go into the ring thinking about why I'm here, like ride down the center line instead of thinking, oh my gosh, I have to be perfect. What is the judge thinking? I need that 70%. They're going down thinking this is about my partnership with my horse, or this, give them language, or they can give you language for what that big why is. That's really, really powerful with everybody, but particularly with teenagers, because it helps them jump over all the things that they're so bombarded with on social media and with their friends, and the pressures they're feeling from their trainers or their parents or whatever, is to get clear about their big why and their values when it comes to the riding. And then the piece about anxiety, one of the things that I've learned is when you have a belief about something. I'll use an example of a teenager I have. Her horse got injured. She's a 3-star event rider. And as her horse came back, she developed extreme anxiety about her horse becoming injured again. And I know a lot of you will be familiar with this. So she would check his legs constantly. She would get up in the middle of the night to go out and rewrap him. She would talk about his legs constantly. She would worry about, jumping too high. It was like it became an obsession. And so her belief was that she was going to injure him again, or that she might injure him again. And I asked her to, because we all have the power to change our beliefs, right? Whether I believe in God or not has no bearing on whether there is really a God. So we all have that ability. So I asked her to identify what belief she wanted to have. What was the belief she wanted to have about this horse? And the belief she wanted to have was that she and he were going to do whatever they could do, and that she was going to be fine and he was going to be fine. If he got injured again, she would figure out his retirement. Like, she kind of made a plan for what would happen if he did get injured again. And then we identified a few behaviors that would be in alignment with the new belief that we're going to, go for our goals. We're going to do what we can and handle whatever happens. And one of those was to trust her trainer. So her trainer would meet with her every morning and meet with her every night and tell her how his legs were. And she wasn't allowed to look at his legs anymore, because that was one of the anxiety producing behaviors. And she identified, a few other things that were in alignment with that rider that was just willing to go for it. And so when you want to shift a belief, it's not enough to just make the internal shift and say, I want to believe this new thing. You've got to identify what thoughts and behaviors you want to have that are in alignment with that new belief. So most people that have anxiety have a belief that drives it, that they cannot handle, whatever's going to happen. So asking them to really make a plan for whatever's going to happen, and then B, having them identify all the new behaviors that are in alignment with that self-trust, that is going to help them, the anxiety decrease. And with my client who went through this, she was able to, what happened with her, she was able to, change her belief around that horse and that situation. And then she was able actually to look at where anxiety was showing up in other areas of her life. And I got her parents on board with she got her parents on board with helping support her in changing some other behaviors. And she was able to get off her medication eventually, her anxiety medication. So, and I think medication is a fantastic tool as well, as long as it doesn't become a crutch. And some of these mindset mastery tools and emotional suppleness tools that we use with our riders, they can have a big impact on them in all areas of their life, not just with their riding. So what's the belief that's causing the anxiety? What do you want the new belief to be? And what are the behaviors and thoughts that are in alignment with the new belief?
Okay, we have one more. I have a student with PTSD from a previous horse with a spooking bucking problem. Today extends to her new lovely Lipizzan pony, who is generally quite a good boy, but when he spooks, he can really make her feel like she's not good enough to be able to help him past it. She speaks very negatively of herself in her riding, which makes me sad because she's a very good rider and person. So I think self-doubt factors into. Anything to add to what you've already said?
Yeah, I mean, that is such a common experience. And to go through the process of asking that rider really, I would say there's two things. There's self-doubt, and then there's also that spooking, the what if, the post-traumatic what if, the emotional state that happens when she thinks the horse is going to spook. So that's a combination of her learning to process that. Like, I would take advantage. You want her to get to the place where she wants to practice. So she goes to ride, hoping her horse spooks so she can practice processing the emotion. And that's a shift I see in my clients all the time. They go from wanting to avoid everything and hoping and wishing everything was going to be perfect and then their horse would never spook again, to being willing to go to their next lesson and ask their trainer to put them in a situation that will inspire the horse to do something so they can practice processing the emotion. So with that rider, there's that too, it's like, okay, it's the emotional, coming at it from the emotional angle of teaching her how to deal with it when her adrenaline goes way up and when he does spook. So she begins to build self-trust. And then also having that be your own best friend conversation. If she thinks all those negative thoughts about herself and feels that way, it's good, that creates her own experience. She can choose to have a whole new relationship with this horse. And again, there's the facts versus the fear. Her fear shades her own experience with that horse, the new horse, and what she believes. So in order to honor her new horse, who does she need to be for that new horse? If she stays in self-doubt, is she being who she needs to be for the new horse? No. If she's going to make a choice not to be in self-doubt, what does that look like? What are the thoughts that she wants to have? What is her mantra when she's riding the good new horse? And I find a huge shift in riders that go from all the what ifs in their head to good boy, good job. I had a rider a couple of weeks ago who has a really spicy redhead jazz mare, and she proceeded to tell me all the reasons she loves this mare, but she's so hot and she's this and she's reactive and she's that. And I said, what do you love about this mare? What's, what is so great about her? And she went on to tell me the great things. And she said, wow, I can't believe, I spend most of my time thinking about the challenging parts of her. So her assignment was to go to her next, through the next month and retrain her brain to be thinking how amazing this mare is. And yeah, the mare might still misbehave some of the time, but it made her more playful and more able to sort of encompass and accept the mare for who she is, not just thinking of all the bad things that might happen and the negative things about her. So, really asking that rider with the new good horse to build him up in her mind and have a mantra that connects them and builds that partnership would be a really powerful thing to do for her too, I think.
That sort of covers our subject. You do have one sort of business coaching question that I'll finish with. Where did you get certified in coaching? Where would you recommend getting certified in performance coaching? Do you think just having a master's degree in mental health counseling is enough instead of becoming a certified coach? Do you want to answer that?
Sure. I mean, those are all great questions. And what I would say, there's no right or wrong. Everybody has their own path. I mean, some people have PhDs in performance, psychology. And my certification in coaching was actually from Seattle Life Coaching, because I wanted to do it in person. And it's because I'd love to hide online. I would have loved to do my whole coaching program online, but I knew I needed to do it in person. So that's why I did it that way. But honestly, most of the experience I got was from actually doing the coaching and working with people. I think that you can do this kind of work if you have a passion for it and you're willing to learn. The biggest mentors are the biggest place where I have learned. Brene Brown is a mentor of mine. Tim Lohr is a mentor of mine. He also works with a couple of other equestrian trainers. He is a performance coach that works with athletes and musicians. And finding people that have done the work and made a big impact and have a way of communicating that works for you, I think that's what I would say is having a mentor is the biggest thing. And the education is great. I have half a master's degree in clinical psychology. I got into the middle of it and I realized I wanted to teach and train, and I was exposed to coaching as a methodology, and I knew I wanted to do coaching instead of clinical psych. So I made the choice at that point not to proceed with my master's degree, and it's never stopped me from doing the work. There's a International Coach Association that you can gain credentials from. There's three different levels. And that's a really, just like going, I'm a big proponent of like going to the USDF instructor certification program for the education, for the credentials, for the value of the process. And I would say the same thing for coaching. If anybody wants to email me with questions about specific programs, now during COVID, that's sort of changed a little bit. There's a lot more online certification available. So I'm happy to share that or have short conversations with anyone who's interested in learning more about that process.
Fantastic, Jen. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Really, really appreciate it. Everybody stuck with us to the end.
Great, thank you. Sorry for trying to cram so much into a small space, but I hope it was at least a little useful.
Very, very good. You're getting lots of thank yous in the chat now.
All right. Yay,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Lyndon.
We'll see you all in 3 weeks.
Yes, I'll be back.
Great. Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, Laura. Thank you.
Everybody else hung up that I unmuted.
Yeah, no, we look forward to having you in about a month, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll be ready. Thank you. See you soon. I'm still in North Carolina. I'm coming home soon.
Are you? Mm-hmm. You're coming back down soon?
Yeah.
Good. Good.
How are the kids doing with Larissa?
Good. We missed you though.
Well, I'll come out. Can I come out and see them?
Of course.
Why don't I plan something? I'll see what her final things are, then I'll come do it in person.
Oh, they would love it. So would I. Super.
I'll call you. I tried to get another donation to go through the file thing the other day. I don't know what I did wrong. I need to call somebody, make my donation. I'm not real.
Okay. I'll have Mary, our executive director, contact you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you soon.
Okay.
I'll call you when I get home.
Okay. Good night.
Bye.